I'm Ken Bruce. I live in Studio City, California. I was born in Lexington, Kentucky, 1945. I am the eldest of six. We were raised by very traditional Catholics. I think some of my schoolmates realized it. And so I got bullied quite a bit. Going through that period, I felt that my life then had to become a secret. The feelings I felt, there was no one to share it with except my buddy Randy. I now had realized later that I had other friends in high school who came out gay later. But at the time, I went to a Catholic high school. It would have been very dangerous to go to any clergy to mention it. And at the same time, I felt a huge amount of guilt. When I was in high school, this was the emergence of the Beatles. So I had to dress that way, color coordinated and trendy. One, this is how I want to dress. I always want to be in fashion of some sort. And two, this is who I am. This is Ken. It's always going to be Ken. We had one bar in Lexington, Kentucky called the Living Room, but we were only 80 miles away from Cincinnati and from Louisville. So the more I started going to the bars, I started finding new friends that we would, of course, gossip on the phone. So my parents wanted to know who all these people were and how come I didn't have a girlfriend. I believe that eventually they figured it out, although they stayed in denial almost through their entire life. It made it very uncomfortable for me for many, many years. So there was a fellow who was 3 years older than I was, and he graduated and he came to Hollywood, and he became a huge star. Had his own TV show. He's gone now. I read that a few years ago. I went to rehearsals I didn't even need to be in, but of course, that's all it was going to be. So when I was a senior at the university, I met a young guy that I was attracted to, and he became my first experience with another man. It was short-lived. It was what it was for the time that it was, but it made me feel secure that this is the person I became, not necessarily the best place to become it, which is why I eventually left Kentucky and moved to Florida. This was 1969, so there were a lot of young Cubans who had come over. So I was out enough that I was going to the bars, and I met a young guy. It was almost like a fatal attraction with me. I just could not stand to be away from him. That's when I began doing drugs. That became a long-time problem for me. That was where my heart was broken for the first time. And that's when I eventually moved to Hollywood, California. Drove across country with three friends. I think I had $400, which was a lot at that time. Like 6 pairs of shoes, of course, 2 pairs of jeans and 2 shirts and some underwear. But I didn't care. I was coming. And we had a friend who was leaving, so we moved into his single apartment, 4 of us, with 2 twin beds. 2 of us slept on the box springs and 2 of us slept on the mattresses, and we rotated. So we had no phone, and there was a payphone at a gay bar nearby called the One Way. I wanted to get into acting. I would call Central Casting. I never got through. I didn't realize there were 10,000 other people wanting to do what I wanted to do. So I got a part-time job pretty quickly working for the telephone company. And it was organizing print ads for the Yellow Pages. My friend at the telephone company introduced me to Jesse, and it was love at first sight. My 2 friends from Florida were still here, and my friend from Kentucky. So we all moved into a big apartment. And it was big. I guess it was big. At the time, it was big enough for 5 or 6 people. But eventually, Jesse and I left there and moved farther east in West Hollywood. We were very close, but like I would like to mention, it was the 70s, and nobody that I knew wanted to be monogamous. It's different now. whether it's a proper thing to do or not, today's relationships, people worked it out. Back then, people just did what they want to do. And I was constantly jealous. I wish I had been able to get rid of the jealousy, really, but I couldn't. So I believe part of my drug habit developed around that. I wanted to stuff my feelings knowing what was going on, but then I was no angel either. Then he met someone and I was in denial and I just accepted it. But it got so painful that I had to move out. His partner became HIV positive and got very sick. And then Jesse, the same. And his partner passed away, 1991, I think. And so Jesse and I moved to a little house on Westbourne Drive. He was still working. He still worked up to a few months before he passed away. And he would go to work as long as he could towards the end. And then he had that PIC line and that awful TPN that they fed them. He was a great guy in that he had a work ethic that I still admire. But he got so that he could not do the medications himself. I would have to do it to set it up and the like. So he passed away in 1995, 1 year before they were able to develop an HIV cocktail. As Jesse's illness progressed, so did my abuse of prescription drugs. By May the 8th of 1995, I was in a rehab facility in Orange County, and that's when I became sober. I had a long history of drug abuse and alcohol abuse, and it was time for me to let all that go. So I went to a treatment center in 1995. I say that proudly because it changed my life. If I thought it was good before, it was so much better. I think that's one of the most important parts of my story is my sobriety. I had not worked the last couple of months that he was alive, so I needed to go back to work. And so I found a job with an old boss of mine. We were able to establish ourselves a niche travel agency, and eventually we became our own corporation, Bruvion Travel. And our first big tour was Ozzy Osbourne. But then after that, we had a buddy of ours who was a tour accountant for Cher. He came to us and asked if we would have the time to take on Cher's farewell tour. Well, of course we did. And then we subsequently became the travel agent for Pink and Tina Turner and Sade and Gwen Stefani and Janet Jackson and so many other people. In 2016, I decided to go off on my own. And so I sold my shares of the travel agency. I was an independent contractor for the appointment group, or they're known as TAG. That brings me up to my retirement. So I was alone in my sobriety and solitude until 2002. So I was shopping at Macy's in West Hollywood and saw this guy shoe shopping. Of course, that's always been one of my things. And so we chatted, exchanged phone numbers. We had our things that we loved together, and food and movies and concerts. And then we had our separate set of things. He lived in East LA. And so we were happy together being apart. So in 2013, we got married. I was in the travel business and we just loved traveling together and experiencing particularly the eastern part of the world, Southeast Asia and Japan and Thailand and Indonesia and Bhutan. As time moved on, we started to grow apart. And I think it's due to the fact that he was much younger and he still wanted to be out there. I'm older. I've been out there. And so I was ready to be at home. Then the pandemic began. And so during the pandemic, he had decided to move in here. And it's just not big enough space for two people. And so we tolerated it for a while. And then finally we decided to go our separate ways. He was an immigrant, and he loved the American dream. With me, he was able to find part of it. He actually worked for me, so he had tapped into the celebrity business. He is still in that business. And I know he's happy because from time to time, I'll be in touch with him. That was 2021. I had retired at the end of 2020 because basically the business went away for a while. It has come back, but I'm not part of it anymore. So I'm happy spending time with my friends. I travel a lot. I'm getting ready to go to Asia in September. Again, back to the same places. I have friends over there now. I volunteer at the Gay and Lesbian Elder House in Hollywood. And I used to be the kid in the group. Now I'm not so much. The person who I trusted completely, who I shared my life with completely, and vice versa, and who I shared my sobriety with, was my friend Sharon Mahana, a woman. We talked to each other about everything. She died suddenly 2 years ago. I had just visited her in Florida after coming back from a cruise. We traveled the entire world together, and that's the person who I always relied on. I could call and tell her everything. Of course, we weren't attracted to each other, so that's probably why the relationship worked so well. You know what Betty Davis said? Aging is not for sissies. And I believe that. Regarding aging, I'd like to mention something that is part of my memory and part of my history. And that is, we lost a whole generation of men and women to AIDS. And those were our mentors and our storytellers. So I am honored to be able to have grown to the age of 79. It has not been easy. One of the most important groups that need to hear these stories is the gay community. I can tell you, you'd have to read to find out what this was like for our people in the 50s and the 60s. We had to go in the back room of a bar. There was a light at the door of a bar where we would dance. When the light came on, the police had arrived. So everybody had to put their drinks down, step away, and pretend like we just happened to show up together talking. But the police were paid. A few years earlier than that, they would arrest gay and lesbian people and then put their names in the newspaper. So we are so fortunate now that we can have a parade that attracts 300,000 people. We could not have done that 50 years ago. Dare 3 or 4 of us stand together and forget any pride wear or any flags. We were doing our best to stay alive without getting beaten up just for walking down the street. At this point, I am only obsessed with one thing. All the other stuff doesn't matter anymore, if you know what I mean. And this is traveling. I have always loved to travel. I know the clock is ticking on my big travel, not to Kentucky, but to Asia or Europe or Italy or somewhere. I still have quite a few places on my bucket list. Since I have fewer friends, it means I have to try to figure out is it okay for me to go there by myself? Last year I went to Thailand and Bhutan, and my brother went with me. And just this morning, I teased him again. I said, I'm thinking about going back. He said, but it's so far. And I said, yeah, I know. Everything's far away.
I never dreamed that now would be so different from back then, you see. Thanks for the laughs and all the grins, sweet memories where joy begins. I gave my love to many friends along a road that twists and bends. May this long journey be our song, an endless tune that carries